Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome back to another edition of Wake and Aware Radio. This is your host, Infinite Consciousness, commonly known as Jason. Visit the Awake, Aware, and Part of the Solution website at www.awakeawareandpartofthesolution.com for loads of news and information that you will not see in the mainstream. Writings by the website creator, all the past Awake and Aware radio shows, upcoming shows, and a discussion page. Check out Awake, Aware, and Part of the Solution on Facebook. You can also check out Awake and Aware Radio YouTube channel. In the last episode, we discussed a possible false flag attack on the 2012 London Olympics and what it would be used for. And let's continue sending positive energy and manifesting such an event to not happen. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the Olympics officially are not over until September. In this episode, we'll be discussing the various unanswered questions, coincidences, and discrepancies of the Colorado Batman shooting. Let's first go into something that was written not too long after the shootings themselves from Natural News. And this is ABC News reported that James Holmes, the Colorado shooter who painted his hair red rather, and referred to himself as the Joker, opened fire at a Batman movie premiere, was a medical student at the University of Colorado pursuing a PhD in neuroscience. The New York Times is now reporting Billy Kromka, a pre-med student at the University of Colorado, Boulder, worked with Mr. Holmes for 3 months last summer as a research assistant in a lab of the Anschutz medical campus. Mr. Kromka said he was surprised to learn Mr. Holmes was the shooting suspect. Quote, "It was just shocking because there was no way I thought he could have the capacity to commit an atrocity like this," he said. He spent much of his time immersed in computer, often participating in role-playing online games, end quote. There's already conjecture that James Holmes may have been involved in mind-altering neuroscience research and ended up becoming involved at a depth he never anticipated. His actions clearly show a strange detachment from reality, indicating he was not in his right mind. That can only typically be accomplished through drugs, hypnosis, or trauma, and sometimes all three. His behavior just doesn't add up. His behavior already reveals stark inconsistencies that question the mainstream explanation of events. For example, he opened fire on innocent people but then calmly surrendered to police without resistance. This is not consistent with the idea of killing everyone. Furthermore, he then admitted to police that his apartment was booby-trapped with explosives. If you were really an evil-minded Joker trying to kill people, including cops, this is still from Natural News, ladies and gentlemen, why would you warn them about the booby trap in advance? It doesn't add up. Quote, Holmes was taken into custody shortly after the shooting, police said, adding he didn't resist when he was arrested, reports the local CBS News affiliate. Quote, after his arrest, Holmes told police about possible explosives in his residence, Oates said. When police searched his apartment, they discovered it was booby-trapped and evacuated surrounding buildings, police said. Oates said bomb technicians are determining how to disarm flammable or explosive material in the third-floor apartment. He said police could be there sometime, end quote. None of this checks out. If you're a killer bent on causing mayhem, why tell the police about your surprise bomb waiting for them back at your apartment? Holmes was clearly provided with exotic gear and bomb-making skills. Continuing from CBS, quote, he said pictures from inside the apartment are fairly disturbing and the device looks to be sophisticated, adding the booby traps were something I've never seen. 1 rifle, 2 handguns, a knife, a bulletproof vest, a ballistic helmet, a gas device, a gas mask, military SWAT clothing, and unidentified explosives were also found in Holmes' car, a law enforcement source told CBS News. Oates said Holmes wore a gas mask, a ballistic helmet, and vest, as well as leg, groin, and throat protectors during the shooting, end quote. Added on July 22nd, quote, he allegedly wore a helmet, a throat guard, a ballistic vest, ballistic leggings, and gloves, and was dressed in black, end quote. In other words, this guy was equipped with exotic gear by someone with connections to military equipment. SWAT clothing, explosives, complex booby traps. Come on, this isn't a lone gunman. This is somebody who was selected for a mission, given equipment to carry it out, then somehow brainwashed into getting it done. Quote, Aurora Police Chief Dan Oates said Holmes' apartment is booby-trapped with a sophisticated maze of flammable devices. It could take hours or days for authorities to disarm it, end quote. And this is from Yahoo News. Officials say that they have removed all major threats at the booby-trapped apartment of the Aurora movie theater shooting suspect on Saturday. They have used a robot to go inside James Holmes' apartment. They were able to disable a tripwire that was set to go off when the apartment door was open. Quote, this is some serious stuff that our team is dealing with, end quote. Shortly before noon, crews were successful performing a controlled detonation. More controlled detonations were possible. There are multiple tripwires throughout the apartment. Investigators have also seen what appears to be mortars planted in the apartment, sort of the kind of mortars that might be seen in a commercial fireworks show. Up to half a dozen of them are scattered around. They have seen a number of inflated balloons in the apartment, with many appearing to be filled with a powder. Also linked together are bottles of liquid, a strong smell of gasoline emanating from the apartment. Several boxes on top of the refrigerator, and there are lights flashing on the boxes. 30 aerial shells, fireworks, commercially legally available for purchase. The suspect may have filled them with smokeless powder. Entering the apartment would have caused the tripwire to trigger one liquid container to pour mix with another. When the two mix together, they set off the main charge of the device, which may be additional flammable liquids. An enormously dangerous mission. About 100 personnel are seen. And the BBC is now also reporting, this is as of a couple weeks ago now, technicians made a first attempt on Friday to disarm the traps believed to include explosives, but withdrew when it became clear the property was too dangerous to enter. Sergeant Carlson said the device was set up to detonate when the first person entered the flat. Quote, we've defeated first threat. It was set up to kill, and that could have been police officers or anything, end quote, she says. In addition to the shells found in the apartment, jars of a kind of accelerant were also found inside the dwelling, says Aurora Police Sergeant Cassidy Carlson. Aurora Police Chief Dan Oates expressed frustration on Friday with the web of wires and devices Mr. Holmes had connected inside his apartment, which were hindering the investigation into the shooting. It was unlike anything we had ever seen before, end quote. FBI has a track record of staging similar assaults, then stopping them at the last minute. This has happened numerous times just in the past year, ladies and gentlemen. This is not your run-of-the-mill crime of passion. It was a carefully planned, heavily funded, and technically advanced attack. Who might be behind all this? The FBI, of course, along with other types of backing agencies, which has a long history of setting up and staging similar attacks and stopping them right before they happen. The FBI had admitted to setting up terror plots, providing the weapons and gear, staging the location of the bombings, and even driving the vehicles to pull it off. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's been admitted by the FBI right out in the open. Even the New York Times openly reports all in stories like this one. New York Times, terrorist plots hatched by the FBI. The United States has been narrowly saved from lethal terrorist plots in recent years. This is from New York Times. Or so it has seemed. A would-be suicide bomber was intercepted on his way to the Capitol. A scheme to bomb synagogues and shoot Stinger missiles at military aircraft was developed by men in Newburgh, New York. And a fanciful idea to fly explosive-laden model planes into the Pentagon and the Capitol was hatched in Massachusetts. But all these dramas were facilitated by the FBI, whose undercover agents and informers posed as terrorists offering a dummy missile, fake C4 explosives, a disarmed suicide vest, and rudimentary training. The FBI provided a van loaded with 6 55-gallon drums of inert material, harmless blasting caps, a detonator cord, and a gallon of diesel fuel to make the van smell flammable. An undercover FBI agent even did the driving. Now, for clarification, I'm on the record in video. This is from the article. In the video posted that was posted within this article itself, that the FBI is 80% good guys and 20% bad guys, which is typical for almost any law enforcement organization. Most FBI men and women are working in the interest of upholding the law. It's only a relatively small number who engage in the kind of terrorism training mentioned by the New York Times. Okay. Mystery man Holmes has no background. On top of all this, Holmes apparently has no background. He's not on anybody's radar screen. Nothing, said a peace officer in a New York Times article. This guy is somewhat of an enigma. Nobody knows anything about him. Mr. Holmes' only criminal history is a traffic summons, the authorities said. He earned a bachelor's degree with honors in neuroscience in 2010 from the University of California, Riverside, and was a graduate student in the neurosciences at the University of Colorado at Denver's Anschutz Medical Campus. He was currently collecting unemployment. Question, and again, this is back to Natural News. How does an unemployed medical student afford $20,000 in weapons gear? If you start to look at the really big picture here, the obvious question arises, how does an unemployed medical student afford all the complex weapons gear, bomb-making gear, flammable, booby-trap devices, ammunition, multiple magazines, bulletproof vest, groin protection, ballistic helmet, SWAT uniform, and all the rest of it? Police said Holmes spent months amassing explosives, weapons, and ammunition. A decent AR-15 rifle costs $1,000 or more all by itself. The shotgun and handgun might run another $800 total. Spare mags, sights, slings, and so on will run you at least another $1,000 across 3 firearms. The bulletproof vest is easily another $800, and the cost of the bomb-making gear is anybody's guess. Which all the specialty body gear, ammunition, booby-trap devices, and more, I'm guessing this is at least $20,000 in weapons and tactical gear, much of which is very difficult for civilians to get in the first place. And don't forget the cost of all the training, thousands of dollars, and the bomb-making equipment, as if there was training involved, but it seems there was some type of training behind all this. At least he trained himself, possibly. But Holmes reported had 30 improvised grenades, mortars, binary liquids that explode when mixed, wires, exotic bomb equipment. This gets expensive very quickly, even if you can source this equipment. The mere manufacture of an explosive booby-trap device is, all by itself, a felony crime, by the way. And remember, Aurora Police Chief Dan Oates said Holmes' apartment is booby-trapped with a sophisticated maze of flammable devices. It could take hours or days for authorities to disarm, and that's from Yahoo News again. Question, where does an unemployed, introverted medical student get the training to deploy sophisticated booby traps, tactical body armor, weapon systems, and more? Certainly not in graduate school. All this leads to an obvious third-party influence over all this. Someone else taught this guy these skills and funded the acquisition of the equipment, it seems. All right, an article posted on Sunday by the Daily Mail reveals Holmes had a mind-boggling stash of ammunition, and 3 types of explosives were found, jars filled with accelerates, chemicals that would explode when mixed together, just like we said earlier, and more than 30 improvised grenades. This further adds to the financial cost tally of what it took to put it all together. The Wall Street Journal is also now reporting the suspect bought 4 guns over the past 60 days and over the Internet bought 3,000 rounds of an assault rifle, 3,000 rounds for Glock handguns, and about 300 shotgun rounds. The suspect also had a 100-round drum-style magazine for the assault rifle that would have allowed him to fire 50 to 60 rounds at a time. All right, now, we need to note this. This is also coming from the Natural News part. Some readers have questioned the $20,000 figure estimated here, saying this gear could have been acquired for only $10,000 or so. And according to the author of that, he says he doubts it, as all the extras that you need to effectively run these guns cost a lot of money. Training courses, spare magazines, etc. Just a decent AR-15 battle sight, a holographic red dot sight, can run $1,000 to $2,000. And you could search ACOG if you don't believe what this author is saying. It's also reported that Holmes bought 6,000 rounds of ammo, which definitely isn't cheap either, especially given that we now have half of those rounds were rifle rounds. It's clear this guy was spending big bucks. Whether it's $10,000, $20,000, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. It's just to make the point. All right, here's 11 key facts I want to grab, too, to point to a conspiracy in the Batman shooting. All right, 1, James Holmes had no job, was collecting unemployment, but was able to purchase close to like we said before, 10,000 USD in weapons, explosives, and tactical equipment, and this all happened within 2 months. The chances that Holmes could afford to finance this on his own is highly unlikely. Someone helped finance this attack. Follow the money, and we will find the masterminds. 2, the testimony of 2 key eyewitnesses totally contradicts the official story, there being one shooter, with no accomplice in the attack. One witness testified that the tear gas canisters came from both sides of the theater. A second witness testified that both the movie began, he saw someone sit down in the front row, and shortly after sitting down, his phone rang, and instead of walking into the main lobby to take the call, he walked over to the emergency exit to the right side of the theater, opened the door, and looked to be signaling someone outside the theater. Shortly after, the shooter made entrance through the emergency exit and commenced his attack. 3, evidence photos. Evidence photos have surfaced of a gas mask outside of the emergency exit of Theater 8. Police reported that when they arrested the shooter in the white Hyundai outside of Theater 9, he was wearing a gas mask. That would make 2 gas masks that were recovered. Also, photos show the AR-15 propped up against the wall opposite of the fire exit door of Theater 9. Police radio communications reported that the night that the rifle was found inside the theater, and even if the AR-15 was discarded outside the theater, do you think the gunman was going to take the time to set the weapon down? The Hyundai, why was the window missing? I thought he put up no resistance as he was being taken into custody. 4. Radio communications from the night of the attack. Okay. First report the suspects was 2 men fleeing the theaters, both wearing backpacks. What happened to these 2 suspects? Reports of 3 people dragging an unknown individual into a nondescript vehicle and speeding off. The majority of the injured and witnesses were not given access to ambulances. They were to be transported by other vehicles to the high school. Why? And police radioed that one of the shooters may be wearing a blue and plaid shirt. Magazine AR-15 dropped in theater. Okay. Number 5. Pool of eyewitnesses. It was reported that the theater had over 300 people in it. There have been less than 10 eyewitnesses, with only a few taking most of the spotlight. For example, Jennifer Seeger. The key eyewitnesses seem to have very well-rehearsed testimony, but have not given much sense to whether their testimony is actually plausible. Jennifer Seeger has consistently given a description of the shooter that miraculously matched James Holmes to a T, even though she has told reporters that she was face down in the aisle and surrounded by tear gas obstructing her view. Seeger also described the gas canisters down to the color. Personally, I believe, this is from this article here, I believe that this was an impossibility in that scenario. She also mentioned that hot shell casings were hitting her in the forehead as the gunman was spraying the theater. How is this possible? She was on her front. Was she not? Another point that should be noted is that for an event that involved 300 people, there has been a surprisingly low amount of postings on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. No one who was involved in the event is talking about it, beyond what that small group of witnesses that have been talking to national media outlets. 6. Holmes' booby-trapped apartment. How are we to believe that a 23-year-old former Jewish camp counselor, gaming nerd, science rock star, neuroscience PhD had the skills to set up a system of explosive devices and booby traps that would have the FBI bewildered for almost 2 days? How are we to believe that? There is no way this maze of death was the work of a neuroscience student. And according to the author of the prior, it's BS. All right, 7. Rumors of Holmes' neuroscience program being funded by DARPA. Neuroscience and DARPA and MK Ultra, the perfect marriage. You can check out the show we did on mind control when it comes to the history of mind control, the CIA projects like MK Ultra that stemmed out of Nazi Germany. But let's go to number 8. Anti-gun agenda. Didn't anyone notice how quickly public officials were ready to talk to the media about anti-gun legislation? Bloomberg publicly called out Obama and Romney to do something about the lack of gun control in the U.S. Excellent timing, seeing as the UN has legislation on the table to ban small arms globally. 9. The fact that Holmes allegedly bought the guns legally, to me, this is the biggest smoking gun that this attack is being used as sounding board for the anti-gun disarmament agenda. Think about it. Most intelligent people who were planning an attack like this would do everything they could to stay off the radar. Buying the guns legally doesn't allow one to do that. What they are trying to do is demonize a legal gun owner, saying, hey, Holmes wasn't a criminal. He was a normal guy who went crazy, and due to his ability to legally buy these firearms, he was able to pull off these attacks. 10. The roommates. The initial reports were that Holmes was living with 2 other people, but once people started asking who these roommates were, the story had changed to no roommates, that he lived by himself. The roommate story had to change because everyone was asking the same thing. If Holmes had roommates, where are they? Are they in the apartment with all those explosive materials? It makes no sense. I don't think there were any explosives in Holmes' residence. I think that they were buying time to construct this BS story. And last but not least, number 11. The father of the Batman shooter is part of the banking elite and has an important role in these interesting times. Most important to note about James Holmes, however, this report says, is that his father, Robert Holmes, was said to have been scheduled to testify within the next few weeks before a U.S. Senate panel on the largest bank fraud scandal in world history that is currently unfolding and threatens to destabilize and destroy the Western banking system. Robert Holmes, whose blue blood family links go back to the Mayflower, is known throughout the global banking community as being the creator of one of the most sophisticated computer algorithms ever developed and is credited with developing predictive models for financial services, credit and fraud risk models, first and third-party application fraud models, and Internet online banking fraud models. Educated at the University of California, Berkeley, and Stanford University, Robert Holmes is currently the senior lead scientist with the American Credit Score Company, FICO, which is FICO, which was formerly known as FAIR, Isaac and Company, and which every American citizen is beholden to should they need to borrow money. Okay. We think that the silence in the media as to this father and his elite connection in the banking industry is mighty suspicious. There are a lot of dots to connect, and this revelation just poses more questions than answers. And 12, Dark Knight shooter was under Air Force psychiatrist care, possibly connected with the government mind control programs. I will refer my listeners to the show we did on the history of mind control, just like I said a few minutes ago. I also want to make a point that all of the people involved in the school shootings from the past that we've heard about, like Columbine and the Tech Institute and all that stuff, in the not-too-distant history, were all on a variation of either Paxil or Prozac, while homicidal and suicidal ideations are the biggest side effects of some people, especially young people. All right. And I want to give just a quick update. I'm not going too deep into this one. Just the other day, news came out that Jennifer Gallagher, who was the nurse who treated victims of the Batman massacre, has mysteriously drowned in the lake near her home. I guess our question is, was she talking? Did they try to silence her? All right, and I also want to go into one more aspect of the Batman shootings because it's important to look at as far as the military connections and the Holmes family gets a little bit creepier. And let me just go through this real quick. WMR previously reported on the connections between accused Aurora movie theater shooter James Holmes and U.S. government-funded neuroscience research programs at the Auschwitz Medical Campus at the University of Colorado and at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California. In addition to his father's research work on neural networks for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is DARPA again, it has now emerged that James Holmes psychiatrist Dr. Lynn Fenton worked as a psychiatrist for the United States Air Force. Aurora police seized a notebook containing drawings of stick figures opening fire with weapons that Holmes mailed to Fenton before he allegedly carried out the massacre of the theater audience at a screening of the Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises. Holmes, a defense attorney, or actually his defense attorney, are trying to obtain this notebook, which legal experts claim is privileged information between Fenton and Holmes, who was under her care during the time leading up to the shooting spree that killed 12 and wounded more than 58 others. Fenton officially practiced physical medicine and rehabilitation in Denver, but she has specialized in the study of schizophrenia. Fenton has served as the director of the Student Mental Health Services at the Anschutz campus since 2008. Holmes was one of 6 students to receive a National Institutes of Health grant for neuroscience research at Anschutz, a program he suddenly withdrew from in May. Fenton is a graduate of the Chicago Medical School in 1986 and did a residency at Northwestern University in 1980. Northwestern's Department of Biomedical Engineering receives government funding to conduct research into neural engineering and rehabilitation, including restoration of human functions, for example, neuroprosthesis, or prosthetics rather, novel motor system therapies for stroke victims, and assistive technologies for victims of neuropathologies. Bio-inspired technologies for robotics, such as artificial sensor arrays, locomotion systems, sensory feedback, and control algorithms. The former Fitzsimmons Amy Medical Center, whose facilities Anschutz now occupies, specializes in neuroprosthetics for veterans who lost limbs in combat. In May, before he dropped out of his NIH-funded program at Anschutz, Holmes presented a paper on microDNA biomarkers in a class of the biological basics of psychiatric and neurological disorders. The Salk Institute, where Holmes, as an intern, worked on temporal illusion projects, is part of the University of California at San Diego. The San Diego campus also hosts a neuroengineering and theoretical neuroscience laboratory and the Retina Engineering Center of the Department of Bioengineering at the Jacobs School of Engineering, which has a program funded by the U.S. Army Telemedicine and Advanced Technology Research Center, which is TATRC. Headquartered at Fort Detrick, Maryland, the home to a number of highly classified military medical research projects, including weaponized anthrax research. One of the lab's projects is the design of retinal implants to replace damaged photoreceptors in the eye by detecting light and properly stimulating neurons in the retina, or, simply stated, a technology that would allow the blind to see. Okay. This goes on and on, but I just think it's important to really look at the history of all this. All right, the Air Force, local and state police determined that Hsu committed suicide. End of story, not quite. Hsu's T-shirt was ripped open from his chest to his navel with a 6-inch vertical incision in his chest. Oddly, Hsu's nipples had been removed. Hsu's wrists were wrapped in duct tape. Investigators determined that Hsu had suffered a psychological breakdown before mutilating himself and then committing suicide. This is something that is definitely connected with a lot of what's going on with this case. Of course, it's still up in the air. A Kendall County grand jury later concluded that no foul play was involved in Hsu's death and had no crime has been committed. Noted pathologist Dr. Cyril Wirt, who investigated the assassination of John F. Kennedy, determining there was more than one assassin, and other high-profile deaths, concluded that there was no way that Hsu could have mutilated himself and that Hsu fell victim to torture and homicide. A trial over payment of Hsu's USAA life insurance policy did result from the death, but the presiding of Hsu's death from suicide to homicide, although he ruled in a take-nothing decision in the USAA. All right. It just gets really strange with this whole case here, but let's move on. Let's talk about real quick how this has been staged just in time for a vote on the UN Small Arms Treaty. If you're not aware, this is a arms treaty trying to ban small arms. And let's just get into this real quick. All right, more and more, this shooting is looking like a deliberate plot staged by the government itself, much like Operation Fast and Furious, pulled off by the ATF, which helped smuggle tens of thousands of guns into Mexico for the purpose of causing gun violence in the USA, then blaming the Second Amendment for it. If you're not familiar with the Fast and Furious program, which connected right to the Obama administration, the White House, and all that kind of stuff, they were supplying guns and arms to Mexican drug gangs. Keep in mind, much of the drugs are brought into the United States through CIA programs, like if you remember the Iran-Contra scandal in the early 80s, Vietnam with the heroin coming in the caskets, and our current numerous illegal wars with Afghanistan, for instance, U.S. and U.K. soldiers guarding poppy fields to bring in tons of heroin to the United States. And this is just another thing. A lot of the cannabis, and I'm not anti-cannabis or anything, just to make that clear, but they have been financing the drug trade in Mexico, but it's also being used for an excuse to stop, quote-unquote, gun violence. All right, all this looks like James Holmes completed a mission and then calmly ended that mission by surrendering to police and admitting everything. The mission, as we are now learning, was to cause as much terror and mayhem as possible, then to have the multiplied by the national media at exactly the right time leading up to the UN vote next week, which, again, this piece was from about a week and a half ago. So, again, it's right here as far as the small arms ban, the UN small arms ban. All right, on the global small arms treaty, that would result in gun confiscation across America. Even Forbes, and by the way, I'm going off live in 90 seconds, but I will still be on for another 15 minutes. If you do miss any of this, I will upload this to YouTube as well. Even Forbes wrote about this quite extensively, warning readers about the coming gun confiscation effort related to the UN treaty. The story was authored by Larry Bell and says the UN treaty could override our national sovereignty and in the process provide license for the federal government to assert preemptive powers over state regulatory powers guaranteed by the 10th Amendment in the addition to our Second Amendment rights. In other words, this has all the signs of Fast and Furious Episode 2. I wouldn't be surprised to discover someone in Washington was behind it all. After all, there's no quicker way to disarm a nation and take control over, or total control over, the population than to stage violence, blame it on firearms, then call for leaders to do something. This is the age-old Hegelian dialectic, which some call the problem-reaction-solution scenario, like false flag events. Such calls inevitably end up resulting in gun confiscation. It's never too long after that before government genocide really kicks in, like we saw with Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, and other tyrants. Let us shift focus real quick, briefly, and this is from the Intel Hub I want to get into. Wisconsin Sikh shooting from the Sikh temple, false flag, multiple shooters, Army PSYOPs, the FBI, Operation Gladio, and the SPLC. As facts continue to surface, it is becoming more and more clear that yesterday's massacre, this is the day the article was written, as far as this piece I'm grabbing out of it, at a Wisconsin Sikh temple has all the hallmarks of a false flag black operation, complete with the same patterns and narratives as the many other lone gunman mass shootings that have taken place throughout the years. The corporate media is now reporting that the alleged shooter is a former U.S. Army soldier who worked in psychological operations. U.S. investigators were hunting for answers on Monday after a former PSYOP soldier attacked a Sikh temple in Wisconsin and killed 6 people before he was shot dead by police. Officials identified the slain suspect as Wade Michael Page, a 40-year-old white male formerly attached to the U.S. Army base in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as a psychological operations specialist. This fact on its own is absolutely startling and follows the same pattern as other mass shootings who almost always have some sort of connection to black ops and or mind control. All right, Shade the Motion Picture, this is something that, was kind of tied into this, but let's just move on with the rest of the information with the allotted time. A major question that remains in regards to Wade Michael Page is whether or not he is actually the live shooter or was set up as a patsy like so many other lone gunmen in the past. Following almost exactly the same pattern as the Colorado Theater Batman shooting, numerous eyewitnesses have reported at least 4 different shootings, just as the FBI claims that there is no reason to believe there was more than one shooter. Family members of victims in the shooting reported that there were multiple shooters, and one eyewitness even noted that men were seen casing the area beforehand. Quote, between 10 and 10:30, 4 white males who were dressed in all black clothing, came in and opened fire on our congregation, end quote. The leader of the temple also confirmed that he had seen at least 2 suspicious-looking men looking over the area before the shooting. Clearly, this shooting seems to be an organized operation and is being covered up by the corporate media as they push the lone gunman neo-Nazi narrative down the throats of America, completely ignoring all witness accounts and other inconvenient facts that would expose this horrific false flag. Right on cue, the Southern Poverty Law Center's Mark Potok, the man that government uses to link false flag attacks to racists, patriots, anti-New World Order activists, and just about anyone who is a threat to the coming world government, has published a blog post that claims Page was in a neo-Nazi band and tried to purchase goods from the FBI-controlled National Alliance. And this is from that. The man who allegedly murdered 6 people at a Sikh temple in suburban Milwaukee yesterday, identified as media reports as Wade Michael Page, was a frustrated neo-Nazi who had been the leader of a racist white power band. In 2000, the Southern Poverty Law Center has found that Page also attempted to purchase goods from the neo-Nazi National Alliance, then America's most important hate group. In the days ahead, we may even see the SPLC link the shooter to legitimate non-racist patriot organizations as the push to label any and all opposition as possible terrorists continue nationwide. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, they're also calling people that are trying to gain their sovereign rights and not call themselves a corporate entity any longer are being calling terror suspects. People of the Occupy movement are also being called terror suspects. People who are speaking out against governmental institutions are being called terror suspects. People that quote biblical, and I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, but people that quote biblical scripture and also quote constitutional amendments and everything else are also being called terrorist suspects. All right, it's also important to note that the SPLC has the connections with the false flag terrorism and shady double agents in the past. To top it off, this attack has been labeled as active domestic terrorism, which plays directly into the hands of the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, who has slowly but surely shifted the focus in the war on terror from Al-Qaeda, which was a CIA creation, by the way, to everyday gun-owning Americans. Operation Gladio in America. Could these last 2 false flag mass shootings in a span of 2 weeks be a sign that, just as many in the alternative media have wondered or claimed, Operation Gladio and or the NATO option have actually been activated in the United States? Operation Gladio and other connected black ops started as a series of false flag terror attacks in Europe that were carried out by the CIA and MI6. Operation Gladio, this is a quote, culminated in the assassination of the Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro in 1978 by the Red Brigades, a terrorist organization infiltrated by the Italian and U.S. Secret Services, wrote Kurt Nemo. A 1992 BBC documentary also fully exposed the once-secret state-sponsored terrorism program. Richard Cottrell's book, Gladio's, NATO's dagger at the heart of Europe, extensively documents Gladio and its continued existence. The recent attack on Libya laid bare the iron fist behind the velvet glove of slogans like human rights and international community. This latest aggression, like the destruction of Yugoslavia and the rape of Afghanistan, proceeds under the cover of NATO. And why not NATO? Author Richard Cortrell tells the story of mayhem, murder, and subversion behind the Alliance for Peace, quote unquote. The covert units of NATO continue to operate, and their fingerprints are found on many different world events. Swedish Premier Olof Palme and Italian ex-Prime Minister Aldo Moro were assassinated. Pope John Paul II was shot by Turkish gangsters who had regular work as Gladio guns for hire. The shootings in Norway in July 2011 and the Belgium, France, and Italy in 2012 all bore the classic stripe of Gladio false flag operations. And they also had a lot of the footprints of Mossad, which is Israeli intelligence, behind it. Has Operation Gladio been activated with the United States as we lead up to the November elections? Now, with all the past school shootings and these two recent events that stink of false flag operations, the corporate government has their excuse to disarm the public and take away the Second Amendment. We are supposed to be able to arm ourselves from the criminals, both street criminals and government criminals with their policy officers. They used to be called peace officers, but now they've been militarized and do nothing now but to enforce the policy of the agenda. Once we are disarmed, then the only ones who will be armed will be the criminals from both sides of the spectrum. And I don't know about you guys, but the corporate banker-owned government criminals are more threatening than the simple street criminals. We also must look at the fact that in every nation that has taken away gun rights from the citizens, the next step was a form of martial law and then a variation of fascism, which is the stated agenda as the systematic destruction of the United States continues. And it's just not the U.S., ladies and gentlemen. This is a global agenda. This is another classic problem-reaction-solution scenario, ladies and gentlemen, for they have created the problem with their false flag patsies, the conditioned public crying out in reaction, and then the same people behind the creation of the problem providing the solution that ends up being less rights and freedoms. In this case, taken away of gun rights so we cannot defend ourselves when the next step of the global agenda is pushed forth. Do not give up your guns, ladies and gentlemen. Put them in a secure spot where they are easily accessible. We must stop waiting for someone or something to come and save us. We are the saviors that we have been waiting for. We just need to awaken from the collective amnesia and take away the illusion of power that we give the small handful of manipulators before this agenda gets to the point where it may seem like there is no return, although the manipulators will fall once the shift is complete. That's all I have for you, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's important to understand this agenda. It's important to understand that, again, false flag operations, problem reaction solution, the Hegelian dialectic, all this stuff is used so that they can create a problem. The masses, the conditioned masses, can cry out for them to do something about it because they don't realize that they're the ones creating the problem, and then they provide the solution, which ends up, as we said a few minutes ago, of less rights, less freedoms, and it's just step by step, which some have coined the totalitarian tiptoe. But they're in more of a jog now because they are desperate, they're scared, so they're starting to throw everything at us. Pay attention, ladies and gentlemen. I will talk to all of you coming up soon, and I just hope that we all stay awake, aware, and become a part of some sort of solution, which includes awakening the masses and stop giving away the illusion of power to the manipulators. You are more powerful, beautiful, and amazing than you've ever imagined. We just got to remember our true power, our interconnection to each other, and stop separating us from us with the various illusions. I love you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a great week.